Jasmine Bowen, and you are watching Remix TV. Today, you notice I'm alone here in the studio, and that's because we have a very special guest who wants to keep his identity a secret. His name is Robert Mazur, and he used to work for the US government, and he wrote a book called The Infiltrator. And we're talking today about the drug trade in Colombia, about the banks crashing down, so many topics to cover. So let's cut right to the chase. We have a lot to do. So welcome, Robert. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
No problem. So let's get started right away. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I was a federal agent for the U.S. government for 27 years. I worked in 3 different agencies. Started off with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, and then went to the U.S. Customs Service Office of Enforcement, and eventually to the Drug Enforcement Administration. Through those 27 years, I principally worked on international money laundering and drug trafficking cases. And there came a time about 14 years into my career that we decided, when I say we, I mean a task force that I was working with, that the most effective way to really try to identify those involved in the command and control at the highest levels of the Colombian cartels and those who were involved in laundering drug proceeds for them would be for us to establish a long-term undercover operation and have people work their way into the cartel providing money laundering services. So that journey began with me volunteering to be a long-term undercover agent, and then going through some undercover schools that were led by several of the more famous long-term undercover agents that had worked in that field, including Joe Pistone, who the book and the movie Donnie Brasco was based upon. But as well on the staff, there were trainers and also psychologists who vet the candidates who volunteer for this type of work and attempt to eliminate those who might have a certain type of psychological profile that really doesn't work well in long-term undercover.
Right.
I completed that training and then spent about a year and a half putting together one of the more sophisticated fronts that has been used in long-term undercover in the money laundering world. I had a completely new identity, embedded in active businesses, an investment company in Florida, a mortgage brokerage business, a air charter service with a private jet that ran from Florida to the Bahamas, and a jewelry chain with about 70 locations on the East Coast, and even a brokerage firm in New York with a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So
wow.
I didn't have to be the very, very best undercover agent. I was blessed with a lot of support and training and preparation before I ever began to emerge in this undercover role. I spent about 2 years working in that undercover capacity, dealing with drug traffickers, working my way up the line until I was ultimately working with people who reported directly to Pablo Escobar, including his principal consigliere, a lawyer based in Medellin, who, by the name of Santiago Uribe, who was a professor at the University of Medellin, a practicing lawyer, and a man who dealt with the legislature there. But in reality, he was a mastermind on international money laundering plans, and I attended many meetings with him and other people who dealt face-to-face with Escobar and other leaders of the cartel, and watched them as they ordered the deaths of individuals. So these were very ruthless people, but very different than the profile that Hollywood portrays. They're not like Scarface. Highly educated, spoke 3 or more languages. These are doctors,
wow.
lawyers.
Now let's hold on a second. So Pablo Escobar, I mean, he is a very big name. People all over the world know him, and they know the image that he has been portrayed as. And I mean, you named Scarface. That is exactly right. That's what people think, that he is this horrible, evil, man probably wearing an eye patch and laughing in a corner. So you're saying that this image is actually different?
Well, Escobar himself was a person who ordered many people to be killed.
Yes.
Escobar himself tried to portray himself in an image within the Colombian world as a respected individual. He tried to run for elected office at one time. He had a soccer team. He was involved in providing kind of a la Robin Hood housing to the poor. all, in my view, as part of a manipulation, really, of getting local support. But he also was the person who ordered, along with the individuals that I met, ordered the death of many people. For example, he was concerned about a particular presidential candidate being elected and had information that this person was going to be on a commercial flight.
Wait, which candidate was this?
Thinking that he blew it up out of the sky with more than 100 people who were on that flight. But when you look at Scarface, no, I don't
Sorry, Robert.
Scarface is much more dramatized.
Sorry to interrupt you. Which presidential candidate was this?
I don't recall, but I can go back in my notes and find it. But it was certainly a presidential candidate that, if there's a good source you can go to about that type of information. It's a book that was written by Mark Bowden, who wrote Black Hawk Down. It's called Killing Pablo. If I had a little bit of time, I could come up with the name for you, but it was one of the presidential candidates that he did not want to have elected, because that presidential candidate was a person who had voiced support for the repeal of the non-extradition laws in Colombia.
Yeah, I mean, that would be definitely something to find out. But even in general, okay, so we're talking about presidential candidates in the U.S. Pablo Escobar is all the way over in Colombia.
In the U.S., ma'am. No, in Colombia.
Oh, in Colombia. This is right. Okay.
In Colombia.
Yes. Okay, that makes things a little more clear. But there is a connection between Colombia and America that you talk about very strongly. So maybe.
Well, there's many connections. The first of which is the embarrassing admission that the population of the United States has the most insatiable appetite for illegal drugs on this planet. So that's the fuel that drives the problems that we face. And not to say that other nations don't have that type of demand, but certainly the strongest demand is in the United States. The other ties that are there, besides the fact that most of the illegal drugs that are being produced by Colombia and Mexico are coming into North America and predominantly into the United States.
Right.
There's also a strong relationship between the banking world, the international banking community and business community, in the handling of drug proceeds, oftentimes knowingly and intentionally.
Right.
I dealt as a conduit between the leadership of the Medellin Cartel and an international bank, then the 7th largest privately held bank in the world, called the Bank of Credit and Commerce International.
Right, yes.
BCCI. But BCCI's conduct was not exclusive to the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. As a matter of fact, the convicted bank officers with whom I not only dealt undercover, but dealt with after their conviction and debriefed them for months at a time, made it quite clear that they were confused why they were being singled out, because they didn't feel as though they were doing anything different.
Now, I mean, American banks and American kind of the population in general, I think that my viewers would be interested to know why they didn't feel like they were doing anything wrong, and why are you coming forward with this information now after working undercover for 27 years?
Well, first off, why I'm writing the book is because I believe that this is information that the public deserves to know. I think that how the cartels operate at their highest levels, how they interface with the international banking and business community, is something that isn't normally heard from firsthand.
Right.
Secondly, I think the book also addresses the issue of what it's like to live in this pressure cooker of existing in a double life.
Yes.
For years at a time, and I think, and also the book speaks to the issue of how effective the long-term undercover money laundering operations can be to identify the leaderships of these terrorist organizations. I mean, I know they supply drugs, but when you look at them today, they are, and even during the time that I dealt with them, they are nothing different than terrorist organizations. They are attempting to create terrorist states from which they can act and they can conduct business on a continuing basis. You can look to Mexico and quite a few number of nations in North Africa, which are the transshipment points for cocaine out of South America, and that's exactly what they're doing. They are attempting to undermine the integrity of institutions within those democracies by paying off police, military, judicial, legislative people, and anybody that might get in their way in order for them to be able to operate without fear of prosecution.
So you are very, I guess, straightforward in saying the statement that the banks, the government, especially in certain places in the U.S., are not trying to keep the drugs off the street. They're actually feeding it.
Well, I didn't say the government, but I did say the banks. And the banks are most definitely. If you look at the history of the banks, not even just looking at the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and I can tell you that we proved what the bank and its senior management was doing by the fact that I met with them directly, and I recorded hundreds of conversations with the senior management of a bank that had a presence in 72 countries with more than 15,000 employees. I dealt with the senior management that were on the board and officers who controlled the presence of the bank in various countries. I dealt with the top management in their Latin American division in Miami, which controls all of North America, really control all of North America and Latin America. There were two people there. There was a person within the Panama branch that I dealt with. There was a person in the Bahamas that I dealt with. There was the manager of the London office that I dealt with. There was the manager of all branches in Europe and North Africa with whom I dealt. The manager
and you name these people in your book, correct?
So this is a lot of senior management that was knowingly and intentionally involved in soliciting drug proceeds.
And you name these people in your book, The Infiltrator?
I certainly do.
Okay.
I also name individuals who were, in addition, involved, based in Colombia, who were involved in the laundering of drug proceeds at the same time that I was dealing with the Bank of Credit and Commerce. And some of those individuals continue to operate within Colombia and are in relatively important positions within the banking and the political world in Colombia. But you can look at, we don't have to go to the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, although it had a significant presence in the United States. It was based out of Luxembourg. That's where it was licensed. And it also was licensed and based portions of it out of the Cayman Islands. But you don't have to go to a bank that's that removed from U.S. roots to see what type of involvement the U.S. banking community and other banks have had in the last 3 or 4 years in the handling of this type of money. Probably one of the best examples I can cite for you, and there's about a dozen banks that go the same way of what I'm now going to explain. But in March of 2010, Wachovia Bank, then the 4th largest bank in the United States, Wachovia Bank entered into what's called a deferred prosecution, which I call a legal slap on the wrist. What they entered into in an agreement with the U.S. government was that, yes, they had committed a criminal offense in connection with their solicitation of roughly $400 billion in deposits during the years 2004 through 2007 from account holders in Mexico. These were accounts maintained in U.S. dollar denominations. And what they admitted to was that not only had they accepted this $400 billion in deposits, but they had also physically transported back into the United States $14 billion in hard cash, U.S. dollars.
Wow.
Money shrink-wrapped on pallets being brought back to what the bank refers to as bank verification note centers in California, where it's counted and then sent to the Federal Reserve and creates bank deposits for the account holders. And what they did is they took money. Imagine this: $400 billion. That's 1/3 of the gross national product of Mexico for an entire year, and that's a nation whose per capita income is roughly $4,000 per person. How could that population produce $400 billion in U.S. dollars? It makes no sense. And the $14 billion they brought back if it was in $20 bills, and I was a money launderer at the highest levels, and I can tell you that the money that we collected, sometimes $1 million, $2 million at a time on the streets of the U.S., usually comes in $5, $10, and $20 denominations.
Okay.
But if the $14 billion they brought back was in $20 bills, it weighed 725 tons. So they think they were getting 725 tons of cash from out of Mexico. The deferred prosecution is this is the agreement. That means the government says, I have this indictment or this information of a criminal charge.
Right.
If you agree that you committed that charge, you don't have to be convicted of it. You just agree, yes, I committed that offense. You then pay a fine after correcting your bad behavior as monitored by the government for 12 months.
Right.
And you also pay a fine. The fine they paid was $160 million, which represented 2% of their gross 2% of their gross profits that year. To me, nobody went to jail.
Yeah, that was my next question for you. You name a lot of names in your book, and names that are well known. How many of these people ended up being prosecuted because of your work?
Well, we can go through them one by one. You can mention the names, but there were roughly there was more than 100 individuals who ultimately were charged as a result of the undercover operation. There were two waves of indictments. The first one, I think there was 80-some individuals who were either involved in the money laundering side or in the drug trafficking side. And then there was a second wave of indictments that came later on, adding to that number and bringing it over 100.
Can you share some of the names with us? I mean, I don't want to give away your whole book, but perhaps share some of the names that were prosecuted, I guess, directly because of your work.
Sure. There was an individual by the name of Gerardo Moncada. Gerardo Moncada was the major manager of Pablo Escobar's routes.
Right.
He managed about 60% of those routes around the world. He made a mistake, even though he was charged in the indictment. We weren't able to bring him to justice because what he did is he stole money from Pablo Escobar. An entire home in Colombia, the basement was filled with cash. It was found. He was brought before Escobar. He and his brother were brought before Escobar. They were hung by their feet. Their clothes were stripped off. They used blowtorches to melt the skin off their bodies, and they died.
Wow.
So Mr. Moncada did not see justice, at least in an American courtroom.
Do you have names of in American courtrooms that were brought to justice?
Excuse me?
Names of perhaps individuals at the bank, people who were prosecuted in the U.S., yeah.
Sure. A gentleman by the name of Amjad Awan. Mr. Awan was a high-ranking official within BCCI. He was actually the heir apparent to become the president of the bank.
Wow.
He, at one time, managed the office in Panama. He was, at the time that I was introduced to him, managing many accounts out of South America through the Latin American division based in Miami. He managed not only my accounts, but he managed the accounts of Manuel Noriega, who, as a result of my dealing with Awan, we were able to get a lot of information about Noriega's his accounts, where he secreted about $50 million in cash deposits that were provided to him by the Medellin Cartel for the free passage of drugs through his country. But Amjad Awan's interesting background included the fact that his father was previously the head of the ISI, which is the equivalent of the CIA in Pakistan. And the bank's ownership included the former head of Saudi intelligence. So there's and I address this in my book, there was a very strong intelligence community connection to the operations of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, including the fact that the CIA maintained accounts with the bank. So Amjad Awan was one of the people in the courtroom, a gentleman by the name of Akbar Bilgrami. His father was a very high-ranking general in Pakistan, and he was involved in the management of the Latin American division there. There's a gentleman by the name of Aftab Hussein. Hussein was a manager an officer in Panama. there was a man by the name of Mazur. Mazur was the bank's senior management person over all branches throughout Europe and North Africa.
Wow, that is a big name right there.
Member.
Yeah.
He was a member of the board, and he was actually arrested in the UK while he was there for the board meeting, and then extradited back to the United States, where he pled guilty. The president of the bank was also charged in the case, and his name escapes me right now. But the president of the bank himself was ultimately charged. We were able to, as a result of the information that the undercover operation developed, execute search warrants around the world at various BCCI locations. That resulted in our obtaining the actual records of Manuel Noriega's bank accounts that were used in his prosecution to corroborate the testimony of the drug traffickers that were otherwise testifying against him. So in effect, it really was an operation that resulted in some of the foundation evidence that led to the successful prosecution of Manuel Noriega.
Now, sorry, Robert, sorry to cut you off. We only have maybe 5-6 minutes left, and you also have another big name bank, HSBC, right?
Yes.
And that is a name that is even more well known. So I just wanted to talk quickly about your kind of involvement with that and what happened with HSBC as well.
Well, what's happening with HSBC is ongoing.
Okay.
What has been revealed of late are documents that were obtained from the prosecutors in two federal prosecutors' offices that allege that from 2005 onward, the bank violated the Bank Secrecy Act and other anti-money laundering laws on a massive scale, not adequately reviewing hundreds of billions of dollars of transactions that were conducted. And actually, the government is alleging that they intentionally hired inept people to fill the positions of their anti-money laundering compliance.
Really?
No questions would be asked about the tainted funds that were coming in. They are in the crosshairs of the Justice Department in the United States, the Federal Reserve, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Manhattan DA's office, and also a Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations.
Wow.
They were, of all of the banks, of all the international banks, they were the most aggressive in what's called the bulk bank note business. That is buying and selling bulk cash, again, picking it up and moving it from country to country. We're talking pallets full of cash. And with respect to HSBC, it's been alleged that their business of buying dollars, buying bank notes out of Latin America and North Africa, and North Africa is a very, very active area where monies from the drug trade are received and transported. That they have been accused of buying roughly $40 billion a year in bulk bank notes around the globe. And time will tell exactly what will happen in the HSBC investigation. But there's a grand jury investigation based in New York looking at possible criminal offenses by bank officers of HSBC in connection with this type of activity that now has been exposed publicly. But even though the HSBC case is ongoing and important, I don't want to lose sight. I mentioned before there are about a dozen banks that entered into these deferred prosecutions. And if I can quickly mention, Bank Atlantic in the U.S., April of 2006, paid a $20 million fine. American Express Bank International in 2007 forfeited $55 million. And again, they too, just like Wachovia, just like Bank Atlantic, admitted to, in a deferred prosecution, to criminal offense. Union Bank of California in San Diego, same thing, but paid a $21.6 million fine.
Wow.
Then we go on to other banks that are very reputable banks in the eyes of the communities of the world that have been involved in handling other types of tainted funds and admitting to criminal offenses and paying fines. And I'll run through them quickly. Lloyds Bank forfeited $350 million in January of 2009. UBS, $780 million fine, admitted to a criminal offense. Deutsche Bank, $535 million in December of 2010. Credit Suisse, December of 2009, $536 million. ABN AMRO, $500 million in May of 2010. And Barclays Bank, August of 2010, fined $298 million and admitted to a criminal offense.
Wow.
So, there's no doubt in my mind that that track record of deferred prosecutions that involved very, very few individual prosecutions is pretty good proof of what the international banking community's involvement is in this type of activity.
Absolutely. No, just before we run out of time, I just want to ask you quickly, what do you hope that your book will accomplish? I mean, obviously you put so much work into your career and now you're coming forward with this information. What do you hope it will accomplish? To bring down the banks?
Well, I hope it will accomplish an awareness within the world about the involvement presently of international banking and businesses in the support of laundering and the importance that that has in creating power for these drug terrorist organizations around the world. If they are not able to launder the funds and transform it from cash in a basement into operating businesses that don't have to make a profit, that can compete against legitimate business people who cannot make a dollar because the people they're competing against can lose 20% and still be making money. That is an important role. They can't go on to corrupt institutions within democracies if they don't have legitimate fronts, and it's a very, very important thing that needs to be addressed. And I really want to raise the world's awareness to the importance of the money launderers in connection with the drug organizations that do things just like 2 weeks ago, 49 people whose bodies were found beheaded, hands and feet cut off in San Juan, Mexico, only 100 miles in one direction and 85 miles in another from the border with the United States. That was done to terrorize the Mexican people and to keep them in line. That type of conduct is horrific, and we need to be addressing it on many levels, including the money laundering side.
Absolutely. Now, Robert, just before we go, can you tell us where you can find your book?
Sure. There's a website for the book. It's the-infiltrator.com. That's the-infiltrator.com. There's a lot of information about the book. The book's available in 4 different languages. It's also, the movie rights are in the process of being developed. And there's a tab on there that says where to buy. So if you click on that, you'll find the links to Amazon.com, Borders, and the other major book distributors that offer it for sale.
All right, well, thank you very much. So if you viewers like what you just heard, maybe check out Robert's book. I urge you to check his facts. He gave us some very big names in the banks that were brought down and that are being currently brought down. Follow the case. Robert was an undercover agent and worked for the government for 27 years and is now coming forward with the banks laundering money from drug sales. So check it out. This is the end of our episode today. Thanks for joining us on Remix TV. I'm Jasmine Bowen, and you've been watching The Elephant in the Room, and I hope I will see you back really, really soon. Have a great day.